The talk of the day, man. Your interview with Channel 4, Cathy Newman. I was watching this, and it was like a self-propelled train wreck. Just for half an hour, it just kept on going. It was quite fun. The memes that came out of it were really good. But I think yesterday or today, it took kind of a more joyless turn. But first, I want to ask you. We'll talk about the aftermath after. But first, how did you experience that interview? What happened there? What was going on there?
Well, there were lots of things going on, which is why people are watching it, right? I mean, there are lots of things going on at many levels of analysis all the time. And it's hard to determine which level of analysis you should focus on, especially when something complicated is happening. The way I experienced it was that I went into the Channel 4 studio and I sat and first in the green room where everything was quite friendly. Cathy was being made up in there, and so we had a pleasant interchange, I would say. And then I was brought into a room where the interview took place with the cameras, and we spoke for 2 or 3 minutes before the cameras rolled, and she was pleasant and engaging, distracted a bit, but it's exactly what you'd expect, right? She's got her mind on many things. But then the cameras went on, and she just was a completely different person instantly. And so that was interesting. You know, it was interesting to me that she had both of those approaches so instantaneously at her disposal, you know. And so, of course, the first thing that entered my mind was, well, my eyebrows went up, and I thought, okay, which of these two people is the real person, right? And then well, you could say she played devil's advocate. I suppose that's one way of thinking about it. She laid out a set of ideological presuppositions, 2 sets actually, her set and my set. And the set of ideological presuppositions that she laid out for my side of the argument bore very little resemblance to anything that I think or say. And so she would ask me a question, which wasn't really a question. It was a barb with bait on the end of it. And I would respond, and then she would tell me...
So you're saying?
Yeah, she would say what I said, except then what she would say had nothing to do with what I'd saying. She was actually...
Quite little to
do. She was fabricating on the fly the person that she hoped, the villain that she hoped I would be, and then insisting that that was me and that denying it was a lie. Essentially, that's what the interview was.
So it's deeply insincere, because she was playing an ideological persona, and she wanted you to play one as well.
Well, she wanted me to be the proper foil for that, you know, and was insistent, is the right word, that I abide by that particular decision. But there was more to the interview than that, because it was, I mean, I've had a lot of experience listening to people. Tens of thousands of hours of experience listening to people, because I'm a clinical psychologist and I've had an extensive practice, and I've dealt with every sort of person you could possibly imagine, and a very large number of people that you couldn't imagine no matter how long you tried. So I was watching her after the first minute like a clinician instead of like an interviewer, and I was really paying attention to what she was doing. And I truly don't believe that anything she said in that entire interview was true on its own. It was all, I actually have a chapter about this in my book called Assume That the Person You're Listening to Knows Something You Don't, which is a taxonomy of conversational types and a discussion about how to engage in a conversation if what you're trying to do is further your knowledge of the truth. If both of you are trying to further your knowledge of the truth, which is a proper conversation, it's the highest form of conversation, not the only form. You could amuse each other too, that's a perfectly good form, or you can have a friendly spar, or you can play a primate dominance hierarchy game, which is very, very common, which is mostly what was happening in that interview. But she was using her words as tools to attain a particular kind of end. And I couldn't exactly figure out what the end was. Some of it would be to dominate the interviewee, especially if that's a person, then that would be contaminated with ideological correctness. You want to dominate your interviewee if you believe that they're wrong from an ideological perspective. And you want to do that, number one, to attain victory, and number two, to buttress your ideological points.
Yeah.
So there was that. Then there was some devil's advocate, I suppose, and maybe that's more forgivable, because you could say that she has a responsibility to do that as a journalist, which I don't believe, by the way.
Yeah.
Asking difficult questions and playing the devil's advocate are not the same thing, even though sometimes playing the devil's advocate is necessary. And then I think there was an underlay of career grandstanding. I don't know that much about her, and I don't know how she's made her reputation, but she is obviously a combative person, and my suspicions are that she's made a success of putting people, maybe she's made a success of herself in other ways, but she's made a success of herself, at least in part, by putting people uncomfortably on the spot.
Yeah.
And so all those things were going on at the same time. And then, of course, underneath that is the fact that there was an ideological battle being played out. I would say a threefold ideological battle. There was the battle between her position, which was radically neo-Marxist, postmodernist, I would say. She was arguing against who she thought I was, and so that was the battle. And then there was the position I was trying to put forward, which had virtually nothing to do with what she was discussing.
She was fighting your strawman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Version of
Yeah, well, and it was like I was able to remain reasonably detached during the interview, because I realized almost immediately that whoever she was talking to bore very little resemblance to me.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, she was quite sophisticated in some sense in what she did, because she did manage to sort of... Her claims became so preposterous and so self-contradictory that it was difficult to remain completely detached. And I think, and this was the crux of the interview, and I think the part that's attracted the most attention, she had asked me at one point in a provocatively self-righteous manner just what gave me the right to assume that my privilege of free speech, let's put it that way, gave me the right to potentially offend someone and hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
And I thought about 6 things at the same time. But the first thing I thought was, you're a journalist. That's the last question in the world you should ever ask someone if you have any genuine integrity as a journalist, because that's all you have as a journalist. You have the right to offend people and hurt their feelings. And so I called her out on that. I said, look, you know, all you've done in the last 20 minutes is everything you possibly could to make me as uncomfortable as you possibly can. Yeah. And I said it in a way that I would say was designed to let her know that I knew exactly what she was doing. And then I suggested that that was actually okay, because she had every right to do that, but that she couldn't have it both ways. She couldn't make her living and her reputation using those tactics, let's say. And those are, for her, those weren't tactics of seeking the truth. They were almost purely tactics of domination, right, and one-upmanship. Yeah. And maybe, you know, if you live in the postmodernist world, you don't believe in truth anyways. There's just victory and power games, and so perhaps that's what she was pursuing. I don't know exactly what she was pursuing, but it was so palpably obvious to the two of us at that point that she had in fact done nothing except try to make me uncomfortable, that calling her on it left her speechless. And then that was the only time, I would say, when I actually spoke to the genuine human being instead of the ideological
so the
front.
Ideological front, it fell off briefly, and then you said,
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah, well, I would say technically, and this might be interesting for people who are interested in Jungian psychology, if you want to understand what Carl Jung meant by animus possession, which is a very difficult concept, then that interview was a textbook case of having a discussion with someone who is animus possessed. And I can't explain what that means because it's very complicated, but if you go and read Jung and you read about animus possession and you need a demonstration of it so that that you get a sense of what it means, then that interview is exactly indicative of that. And I would say, as advice to people, maybe it's more like education, with anyone who is animus possessed, their goal is to engage you in the argument. if you engage in the argument on the terms they've defined, you lose. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose.
Yeah.
You lose as soon as you engage in the argument. And so what I did in the interview was just not engage in the argument.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say I did that with 100% perfection.
Yeah.
One of my friends, a very smart guy, there was the scene, let's say, where she was taken aback. I said, "Ha, gotcha." And my friend said, "You know, maybe you could have played that differently there. Maybe you could have said, all right, so, you know, obviously you just thought about what I said, you know, and maybe we could actually have a real conversation about that." But, you know, I had become somewhat angry, a little bit, at that point, because she had violated the rules that make journalism possible by suggesting that I didn't have the right to make people uncomfortable with my speech. Like, she had broken a rule that she shouldn't have broken, in my estimation, and that made me angry. And so I said something that was designed to be witty, hopefully it was witty, and I thought that was a reasonable approach, and maybe it was. But it might have been better to have played it straight and said, look, okay, now we can get somewhere, you know, because we're actually talking now.
Yeah, so you mean that after the "ha, got you," you would have taken control of the conversation?
We could have actually had a conversation.
Yeah.
We didn't have a conversation,
No.
or well, depends on what you mean by conversation. We had a kind of conversation, but what we actually had was a dominance hierarchy dispute.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
With an ideological overlay.
Yeah, definitely. So then, it went quite viral, actually. I think it
Unbelievable.
got
It
millions
was
of
trending on YouTube.
Yeah.
It was number 7 on trending on
Number
YouTube.
7.
Number 7, yeah, crazy.
And
man.
some loose clips on Facebook also got...
Hundreds, millions
Yeah,
of
no,
views.
definitely.
Yeah.
And
I
then,
know Derek Blackman in the US made a clip,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah,
got
he did.
750,000 views in
Yeah,
like
it's
one
insane.
day. Yeah.
Then the memes came, and then, a day later, it kind of took a joyless turn.
Yeah, yesterday and today,
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's amazing.
That's
Well, you
the
see,
aftermath.
so here's the strange thing, eh? So I kind of played, let's say, knight on white horse. And so The Guardian yesterday published a astoundingly reprehensible article.
About your book?
No, about the Channel 4 interview. No, they've done some nice interviews about my book. So they've been kind of all over the place with me, you know. But the Channel 4 people claim that Cathy has been targeted with threats